Game balancing is overrated, and in this video I'm going to tell you why. And yes, we will be covering why Street Fighter is a bad game, and how balancing does not equal fun. By the end of this video, you will understand why balancing should not be put on this pedestal that gamers put it on through the games Street Fighter, Footsies, Melee, and Street Fighter 2. So let's get into our first example, starting with the thumbnail of this video. Street Fighter was released on August 12, 1987 for Japan in arcades. The game had a story mode where you would adventure as Ryu and fight different opponents around the world. But what we'll be focusing on today is the multiplayer mode. This was the first fighting game to have a game mode which two players could fight against each other, and the game would be completely balanced. There was no inherent advantage between the characters within the game. How did they achieve this, and subsequently, how was it a bad thing? Well, the game had two characters, Ryu and Ken, and these two characters were exactly the same. There was no room for jank, cheese, or other unfairness. This must make the matches more interesting and tense, right? No, in fact it led to the opposite. There was no nuance and no uniqueness between matches, leading to a monotonous and repetitive gameplay experience. Now you may think, this is just a one-off case, who can say another completely balanced game cannot come up and have success? And so I say, I am always 5 steps ahead. I have another example up my sleeve, and it is Footsies, releasing on September 30th, 2020, originally as a browser game, but eventually getting ported to Steam, a game that focuses completely on the neutral aspect stated within the title. Footsies is described as a mid-range ground-based aspect of fighting games in which neither character is in an advantageous state and they are trying to get a hit on the other character. It is an essential aspect of every fighting game. Considering this was the only aspect in this game, and there wasn't any characters, this is complete skill with no room for cheese, so obviously this game took off and became successful, and pigs began to fly as everyone lived happily ever after. No, of course, that wasn't the case. The only time this game was seen competitively was when it was held as a side event at EVO 2019, and it saw no success in the competitive scene afterwards. I mean, just look at this combat. Does this look fun to you? Now, of course, all these two games prove is that a completely balanced game is not able to be successful due to how much they bore everyone watching. How can I prove to you that unbalanced games do well? Look no further than Smash Bros Melee, the famous Nintendo game released for the GameCube on November 21st, 2001. It has held on to its relevancy as an underground competitive fighting game to this day, often attributed to its unique style of play as a platform fighter and its unique mechanics. With such dedication from the fan base that it has its own extensive lore about the players and meta of the game, from having a king to having the 4 gods and even a god killer. It shows how invested the community is in this scene. So obviously, seeing how long it's been played for, the game must be balanced, right? It was not, by a long shot. The meta goes something like this. Good, you use these characters, they're viable, S tier. Some good matchups, may need secondary for some matchups, A tier. Unlikely to win given how much they get stomped by the good characters, B+ to C+ tier. Don't even try, uninstall the game, move to a different country and change your name, because why would you embarrass yourself by picking one of these characters, C and below? As you can see, there are very few characters out of this roster that people consider good, and the tools they have are considered vastly superior most of the time. Yet despite all of this, Melee is a beloved game and has had a long-lasting and dedicated community, this year alone having 10 major tournaments. Genesis 9 pulled in 99.4 thousand livestream views at peak viewership, and the highest paying tournament holding up to $50,000 in their prize pool. Now, why is this? Well, I would like to make the claim that the reason that Melee and the first Street Fighter had such a different reception is directly related to this unbalanced aspect. You see, the lack of balancing within Melee is directly caused by the in-depth and extensive mechanics within the game, such as wave dashing, L canceling, meteor canceling, box trotting, dash dancing, wave shining, crouch canceling, multi-shining, DIing, smash DIing, wall taking, normal taking, scar jumping, bombs attacking, and more. Each character has different attributes, stats, and their own unique techniques that affects the way the game is played, and makes each match something unique and different from the rest. This makes it so that every character in the game has some representation due to their own uniqueness. Best example being this weird DK cult thing going on.
According to some Midwest players, Donkey Kong's recent results were no coincidence. A secretive group known as Project Silverback would form with an ambitious mission.
What I will say about Project Silverback is that it was really a collection of some of the greatest Melee minds I've personally ever known. Probably a lot of players that you've heard of or have discussed who will not come forward and say that they were a part of it. We were sort of a
a character that is widely seen as not good having a sizable player base, and people committed to expanding their meta of said character. Now that I've gone into depth on why Melee was successful and why Street Fighter failed, there is still bound to be some naysayers. Well, you can't compare the two, because they are such different games. And to that I say, how have I brought into this topic more directly? So here, we will be looking into Street Fighter 2, a direct comparison to its predecessor, Street Fighter 1. Street Fighter 2 was released on February 1991, and with this new game came 8 characters instead of just 1 character that Street Fighter 1 had. This is not big by today's standards, but this increase of characters changed the game drastically. The game could now be experienced in 8 different ways, adding to the replayability and quirkiness, which can be seen in the development of different playstyles. You have Ryu and Ken if you prefer the traditional style of play of the Shotos, Zangief if you prefer the slow but powerful playstyle of the grapplers, Guile if you want to zone and space out your opponent, and Sagat if you want your opponent to throw themselves out of a 10-story building in-game. And with these characters arose techniques, or tech for short. These are often specific mechanics usually used for competitive. They are specific actions or strategies used to get the advantage on your opponent. An example of a tech in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo could be the fireball trap, where you would play as a Shoto with your opponent in the corner, you stand half screen away and throw 2 light fireballs, the first to hit their block and the second is to cover them jumping. A very simple tech, not requiring much precision of the player, just basic game knowledge, but it's important to show a basic and character specific tech. The important part in all of this is that Street Fighter was finally enjoyed within the competitive scene, and I believe this shows the necessity, or rather necessary evil, of unbalanced gaming. Now, to avoid further confusion, I'd like to clarify that I'm not saying game balancing is unnecessary. It is definitely necessary that the game has some form of balancing, or else you can end up in situations like Smash 4 Bayonetta, where she essentially killed the game due to how often you'd see her and how repetitive the game became. A game unbalanced to that degree will result in the same repetitiveness and boredom as seen in a completely balanced game, but it is essential that a game is somewhat unbalanced, as allowing games to have this difference in balancing opens the possibility for these advanced techniques, unique characters, and overall memorability of the game. And that is why I say balancing is overrated.